welcome everyone, and good morning. And this is Min Fan from U.S. Heartland China Association. You're joining the right event, the Story Circle, Cultivating Intercultural Competence, Building U.S. China Bridges. And for those of us who are familiar with the Way Forward webinar provided by our organization, this is a joint effort, and we're really honored that we have this opportunity to bring the Asia Society Bridge project to you. Before we get started, 2 housekeeping items. One is throughout the event, you can submit your questions, and through the Q&A option, you can control your view by turning upper right corner, whether it's a tile or active speaker, that's your control. And also at the end of the event, when you leave, there's a very quick survey. For every event, we have a quick survey just to get a thumbs up, thumbs down, to get feedback. So please take your time to do that. But before we get started, I'm going to bring the chairman and CEO of our U.S. Heartland China Association, former Governor of Missouri, Bob Holden, to give a few opening remarks. Governor Holden.
Thank you, man, and delighted to be with everybody. Look forward to Blaine taking charge on this program too. I couldn't be more pleased to have the young people actively engaged in this discussion. It's something I think is much in need in our country and around the world. As a former governor, I started the first youth cabinet in the country as governor. And so anything that we can do to open the doors for young people to take an active interest in public policy and what we need to be doing in the future, I fully support. And so I'm looking forward to listening to all the participants and the students as we do this program, and delighted just to be a part of it.
Thank you, Governor Holden. And yes, please sit back, and let's, before we actually turn to Blaine Brown now, and who will share a few remarks as well. Blaine, please.
Thank you very much, Min. The goal of international education has, in some times, been described as to promote mutual understanding and prepare students to live, work, and function productively and effectively in a diverse multicultural environment. And the challenges now are very steep. In order to carry out a lot of these objectives of international education, we've got an unfavorable geopolitical environment with restrictions on trade and mobility and communication. And this has all been exacerbated by the pandemic, which has further restricted mobility and has disabled some of the standard means of international education, which are study abroad, exchange of persons, international conferences, things of that sort. And we're going to learn today about ways in which these educational goals, specifically between the US and China, can be pursued and even achieved in our current circumstances, and also provide an important dimension even after our circumstances improve. And I would also say that for the people listening to this program, if you enjoy this webinar, please let us know, and also share any ideas you may have about future topics and presenters. And now, Min, back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn the event to the true host, Frank Dolce from Asia Society. So Frank, I would like to introduce yourself, and now I'm going to stop sharing, and please bring up your slide.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Dolce. I am the Director of Networks and Engagement at Asia Society, a post I've held since January when I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, getting my PhD in second language acquisition and applied linguistics. I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to today's event, which is focused on illustrating our emerging methodology for facilitating meaningful intercultural engagement between diverse international and domestic students. So my own PhD background, paired with my training as a conversation analyst, as well as my background as professor of Mandarin, led us down this path. We've had hundreds of interviews and scores of piloting sessions with students from across the country, as well as both sides of the Pacific. And that's what really led us down this road of refining a methodology focused on this UNESCO storytelling. So we believe it provides a safe space where diverse students can come together as equals to explore similarities and differences. And then of equal importance, in turn, not just explore differences, but learn how to engage with difference. So we recognized early on that bridging diverse Chinese and American students could be an important initial step, but by no means is this exclusively for students that identify as Chinese or as American. In fact, it's for any students that are interested in engaging across language and cultural lines. Today's event will unfold in a couple of steps. First, we will hear from Dr. Darla Deerdorf, who's the main author of the Story Circles Manual and creator of the methodology itself. So Dr. Deerdorf will provide some important background that illustrates the Story Circle methodology as an effective way to cultivate intercultural competence, sort of linking the theoretical with the practical implementation. My colleague, Frank Huang, and I will then describe how Asia Society is going about designing a virtual ecosystem for intercultural engagement centered around the Story Circle methodology. Following that brief interview, we'll hear from 4 of the over 100 students with whom we've been piloting the Story Circle system over the course of the summer. Given the way in which our design has been constantly informed and improved based on feedback from students, we thought it was really important that you hear some of their own voices and ideas incorporated into this session today. Finally, following those student testimonials, we'll open up the floor to questions. Audience members are encouraged, as Min mentioned, to provide the questions, to type in the questions and provide them in the Q&A. Really any questions that you have to myself or to Dr. Deerdorf will be available. You'll have the opportunity to do that. So lastly, before I turn over the floor to Dr. Deerdorf, I want to mention 2 outreach partners we've had for this event today. The first is the Chinese Language Teachers Association. So CLTA has a history of almost 60 years and a core membership of over 1,000 active individuals from across the country, professors mostly. They also have 13 affiliated regional associations that have over 2,000 members on top of that. They've grown to be a premier international organization supporting Chinese language teaching and learning for K through 16 professionals. And then we also have One to World. One to World engages the almost 100,000, staggering number of international students that are studying in the New York area, including 800 Fulbright grantees, through programs that create understanding and build positive relationships between local residents and these unofficial ambassadors from all over the world. These are natural partners with us and really show how when we explore the importance of intercultural competence, it's about bringing together people, administrators, professors, and the students. And we hope that this ecosystem and this program can be a starting point for that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Darla. And yeah, Darla, the floor is yours. I will have your slides ready to go.
Sure. Thanks so much, Frank. And hello to everyone. A special shout out to all the students who are joining us. And I have to say, actually, in addition to my professional roles, and I'll say more about that in a moment, I'm also a parent of 2 undergraduate students, one a freshman who's just starting and a junior. And they both studied Mandarin when they were in elementary school and had the opportunity to practice a little bit when they were in China quite a number of years ago. So this is all very near and dear to my heart in a very personal way. Professionally, I should mention, I am an executive director of really an international professional association called the Association of International Education Administrators, AIEA. And its members are university leaders who are tasked with the responsibility of internationalizing their institutions. And I believe we may have a few of them joining us here today as well. And so hello to all of you as well. But it's really important to really bring more of a global focus to all students at the universities. And so I am so inspired by the work that Asia Society is doing and very grateful for them being able to adapt this particular methodology. And I want to say a little bit more about that. I should also mention, I also work with a nonprofit called the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence. So for those of you who are interested in delving even further into this, please contact me. I'd love to get you connected to the World Council as well. So part of what I've done has been this research for over the last decade on something called intercultural competence. And when persons outside of academia ask me what I research, I tell them that I try to research what's necessary for us to get along together as humans. And like I said, I've spent the last decade doing this, and as part of my research and work, I've had the opportunity to work with the United Nations on some projects related to intercultural competence. And one of those projects several years ago resulted in a publication that you can find on the UNESCO website. And after we put, which is not the one you see here on the slides, by the way, it's another one. We were looking at regional perspectives of intercultural competence around the world. Once UNESCO shared that with their member states, with the countries who are members of UNESCO, they received feedback that these countries would really like to have a very concrete way of developing intercultural competence. And so they asked UNESCO, can you provide a very concrete methodology that can be used with any group of people anywhere in the world using little to no resources? And that could be facilitated by someone who may not have a formal background or training or education in intercultural communication. Well, those of you, and I know there are several of you on the call today who are engaged in intercultural training, know that that's a really tall order. It's really hard to find any kind of intercultural training that fits all four of those parameters. And in fact, a colleague and I several years ago put together an activity book called Building Cultural Competence that had over 50 different activities for building intercultural competence in the classroom or beyond. None of those would fit that description of what these member states wanted. So we got to work, did some research, focus groups, interviews, and I'm pleased to report that yes, we did come up with an intercultural methodology that fit all four of those parameters, that could be used with any group of people anywhere in the world using little to no resources, and that could be facilitated by someone without a formal training in intercultural communication. And that is what you see here on the screen. UNESCO wanted to pilot this around the world to make sure it does work with any group of people. So we have spent the last couple of years piloting it in all 5 UNESCO regions. I'll speak more about that in a moment. But it's just been an incredibly rich and exciting project to work on. And it uses something that's been around for as long as humans have been around, and that is sharing stories, really connecting with each other from the heart through stories. And this circle methodology is also something that's been around for a very long time. It's come out of a number of different cultural traditions, including indigenous traditions, so I want to acknowledge that. And it's an adapted version of a circle process. Some of you may be familiar with circle processes that have been used for restorative justice, that are used in the classrooms, that have been used for mediation, for any number of different purposes. But this is a particularly adapted story circle process for the purpose of developing and practicing intercultural competence. And Frank and his colleagues at Asia Society will go into more detail about what that looks like because they've been able to kind of adapt it even further for the purposes that they need, and they'll share more about that in a little bit. But I would say that it's a very structured process, and yet it's also very adaptable because we've been able to adapt it to different contexts. So before we go to the next slide momentarily, I just want to say all of this is open access, and it's available currently in 5 different languages. Unfortunately, not yet in Mandarin, but we're hoping to change that. But it is available in 5 different languages. And so I encourage all of you to download this manual and to use it widely. UNESCO really hopes it can be used widely, and are thrilled that Asian Society has been able to adapt a version of this to use within the Asia Society context. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the pictures from our pilots. So we did pilots initially in Bangkok, Thailand. You'll see some pictures here from Harare, Zimbabwe, also from San Jose, Costa Rica, where we were working with indigenous leaders. We worked with youth activists in Tunis, Tunisia, and then we worked with middle schoolers in Vienna, Austria. And that was actually the only formal learning setting. As you see from 2 of these pictures, 2 of them were literally outside under trees in Zimbabwe and in Costa Rica. So it's just been an amazing process to go through this with UNESCO, to pilot this officially, but then I've also used this in unofficial pilots. For example, with over 200 language teachers in Beijing a couple years back. I've used it in South Africa at my own. I'm a research scholar at Duke University in North Carolina, and I've used this in a number of different contexts at Duke, including in new student orientation and bringing domestic and international students together. We've also used it in the biology department at Duke with the graduate students and biology faculty. We're using it in global health classes. And now, because of this pandemic, we're very excited to let you know that it works virtually. Of course, these pictures are all in person, but now UNESCO has taken this kind of as part of phase 2 to use story circles virtually. And we have been training United Nations staff in Brazil. In just a couple weeks, we'll be training United Nations staff in Cameroon. And so we're really using this all over the world virtually, which is quite exciting to see that it's still possible. And in fact, in one case in Brazil, one of the participants said it was the most amazing experience she's had in the entire time of lockdown. And had no idea that could have that kind of connection with people just through a computer screen. So you'll hear more about that from students who've actually participated in the Asia Society's adaptation of story circles, but I just wanted to kind of share with you a little bit of that context. So one of the activities in the manual, and on the next slide, we're gonna engage with this, is an activity that we've used to help focus participants who are about to engage in story circles. So I actually wanted to do this briefly here with you now. And again, you can find this in the manual. But I want you to think of someone you know personally. This can be a family member, a coworker, a neighbor. So someone you know personally, or someone known to you. So this could be a very well-known famous person. And you don't need to tell us who you're thinking about, but this needs to be someone, a real person, who you think does a really, really good job of connecting with lots of different kinds of people, regardless of their background. So maybe it's someone who connects very well with people of different ages, different generations, maybe someone who connects really well with those from different religious backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different political beliefs. Whatever it might be, someone who just does a great job of connecting with so many different kinds of people. And then in the chat box, I want to invite you to type in words or phrases that describe how this person's able to be so successful. What is it about them that allows them to connect so successfully with so many different kinds of people? So if you could take just a moment and just type into the chat box words or phrases that would describe this person. Great, words are already popping up. Thank you so much. Non-judgmental, caring, curiosity, empathy, flexible, great listener. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcoming, open-minded, respect, compassionate, enthusiastic, generous, friendly. Listening is showing up a lot. Open-mindedness is showing up a lot. Fantastic. Patient, friendly is showing up a lot. Encouraging, not presumptuous. Interested genuinely in people. Yes. Humble. Lots of patience. Yeah, great. Wonderful. Yeah, grateful. Yeah. Tolerant. Genuine. Quick to smile. So the nonverbals are important. Yeah. Willingness to observe and reflect and to think more deeply. Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for sharing there, and please do continue to share what comes to mind as you're describing this person. And what I wanted to say is what you've just done is describe intercultural competence. This is what intercultural competence is. This is what it's all about. And if you see on the next slide, you'll see how this kind of fits into a framework around intercultural competence. So there you go. I know this is really hard to see. This you can actually find in the manual when you download it. But this is the framework space from my research, which became the first research-based definition and framework of intercultural competence. But if you were to be able to see it, I know it's very small, you'll see a lot of the same words you just put into chat here about openness, curiosity, respect as really key attitudes of listening. You all mentioned listening, someone said observing, it's there in this framework. And then several of you mentioned empathy and flexibility, it's there. So you'll see a lot of those different pieces that you've just described right here in this framework as what intercultural competence is all about. And you'll see two different versions here, the frameworks. One was that looks more like a pyramid, shows that trying to emphasize the attitudes, that curiosity, respect, and openness that you all just shared about are really foundational to how we are able to relate to others in a respectful manner. So that's really important. But of course, any research, any model, there are limitations, and it's hard for any framework to capture reality. So the second one that you see there, the process orientation, is trying to show that this is a lifelong process for all of us. We are all on this journey, and we try to go every day toward that which we don't know, to learn and be curious and to continue to learn about each other as global neighbors. And so this is trying to show more that process of developing intercultural competence, and that it really is lifelong for all of us. And there's no point in time when any of us can say, yep, I'm interculturally competent. And while language is really an important part of this, language alone does not make one interculturally competent, because as you can see, it's so much more in addition to the language piece, which is obviously also very important with intercultural competence, and why I'm so excited again about why Asia Society has chosen to adapt this version of story circles to use, and you'll hear more about that momentarily. So kind of moving into more story circles, I just want to say, taking this framework as the basis for story circles, which it was, so no, it is built on a theoretical framework, we developed specific objectives from this framework for story circles. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the main goals, again, based on the framework I just shared with you, for developing and practicing intercultural competence, that this is an opportunity for participants to demonstrate respect. This is especially an opportunity to practice listening, and not just any kind of listening. We really stress the importance of listening for understanding, which means as humans, it's just natural. We tend to listen for response, or we listen for judgment, for what is my opinion of what you're saying. But in both of those cases, it's how am I going to respond to you? What do I think of what you're saying? The focus is still on me. And we try to stress with story circles that it's about focusing 100% on the other person, on what they're saying, how they're saying it, what they're not saying, on the nonverbals and so on. So really, this is an opportunity for practicing listening for understanding, which has been almost an aha moment for many of those who go through this, this experience. It's also an opportunity to cultivate curiosity, to increase cultural self-awareness, as you'll see Frank will talk about the prompts that are used, for developing empathy, and then for engaging in critical reflection. And as you'll hear from what Frank is going to share, the way in which Asia Society has adapted the story circles for their purposes really hits on so many of these key targeted intercultural competencies based from the framework. So that's just a little bit that I wanted to share with you. I'm happy to answer questions at the end during the Q&A. And again, if any of you are engaged in story circles work, I would love to hear from you. And especially if you're interested in intercultural competence, please do be in touch. So with that, thanks so much. That's just a bit of the background and kind of the theoretical, linking it to the practice. And now you'll hear even more detail from the Asia Society colleagues about what this looks like in that particular context.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deardorff. Thank you, Darla. I must admit that I initially intended to actually provide a brief introduction to Dr. Deardorff and her work. And obviously that ship has sailed. But let me reiterate then while showing this slide to you all that we're really fortunate to have Dr. Deardorff's support for this project. This was not simply a matter of me finding this manual, reading it vigorously, and then trying to implement it. Dr. Deardorff has been available to help me sort of think about how we modify this to a virtual setting as well as to our unique and diverse student community. So for that, Dr. Deardorff, I thank you for your ongoing support and expertise. So moving forward now, I would like to start by introducing you all to a close colleague of mine who's been instrumental in helping me implement this all summer. So I'm Frank Dolce, but I believe we have another Frank who would like to also join in here. Frank?
Yep. So hello everyone. To be frank, my name is also Frank, and you can call me EJ. My Chinese name, either name works. And I'm the intern for Asia Society Bridge initiative over the summer.
Thanks, Frank. So yeah, Frank and I are going to take you now through the ins and outs of this initiative. Our goal is to just sort of show how we've taken this methodology and modified it based on diverse feedback from students to suit our community in these really unprecedented times we're living in right now. And so we'll take you through this.
Yeah, so I will start with our core objective. So our core goal is to provide a safe space where diverse Asian and American students can come together to first share interculturally and reflect critically. And through this supported process of engagement and reflection, participants can come together to cultivate intercultural competencies together. And our outreach and expertise has led to initial focus on US-China bridge building, it's the name of our initiative. But all the students with curious hearts, with 好奇心, as how we say it in Chinese, are welcome to participate. And we will leverage UNESCO's story circle methodology at the basis of the intercultural engagement, tailoring this methodology to our diverse student groups. And it's as Dr. Deardorff explained earlier.
So many things we already do at Asia Society fit a metaphor for what an event and what engagement is. We often focus on transmitting interesting ideas from experts to a broad audience. And that makes a lot of sense given that at Asia Society, we have access to a ton of expertise on Asia, whether it's geopolitics, culture, history. And I see this as reflected in the metaphor on the left, like whereas we have an expert has a full cup of water or a full vase of water, and then they're going to pour it into the relatively empty cups of the masses. So I am of the belief that if we want to help get college students to develop as global citizens, to develop global competencies, which is a term we use at Asia Society a lot, it's important that students have an active role in driving dialogue with one another across linguistic and cultural lines. So this I see as reflected in the metaphor on the right, where our content, whether it be like the right sorts of story prompts or down the road, other initiatives, we might have articles or other things, can be seen as raw materials that can fuel dialogue. So if they are organized thoughtfully, within the right sort of virtual ecosystem, how can these sorts of raw materials, you might say, of story prompts, of content, be able to drive dialogue? The fire itself is sparked by the student participants sharing with one another, but it is fueled by the right combination of the right sort of content and then a supportive ecosystem built around core principles such as those that Darla articulated. So this focus on creating the right sort of ecosystem is reflected in our overarching Asia Society bridge process that we have in mind, which puts an emphasis on leveraging content. So in this case, like student stories and the story prompts that we provide to drive dialogue between diverse students. And so this broad process it includes at its center the recurring story circle meetups, which you see in step 5. but the process at large that exists around it involves we solicit storytelling prompts from a broad network of students, including our student ambassadors. And then we post our own stories, as well as the stories of ambassadors who approve of us to our community. We can then also make them bilingual in a way that will interest a broad swath of students that are interested not only in intercultural engagement, but also in foreign language learning. Obviously, there's a really close and interesting relationship between those two processes and motivations for students. But Darla was right to point out that we really want to take students from just thinking about learning a language to thinking about learning how to listen for understanding in other languages. And then so moving into 4, we can then post diverse student stories, including our own team stories on a range of student-generated prompts. And all of this sort of ramps up to our recurring event where we actually organize weekly or bi-weekly meetups where students share stories with one another. And that's really what we've been piloting a lot over the course of the summer, how those recurring events will go.
So here I'm going to introduce, we have different layers of engagement where diverse students can involve as they see fit. So student participation can take a range of forms or levels because our system is designed to gradually allow students to grow into involvement with the initiative. So first level, you can just join us and just read or watch participant stories. And the second level is you can join story circles and exchange stories in the story circles. And the third level is the most central level. You can also be a student ambassador to help moderate events. And even the most central ambassador roles will involve no more than 2 to 3 hours of participation each month so that we can have all the interest students to participate. And we think it's really important because we don't want students' time zone and the busy schedule or socioeconomic status to affect their ability to participate in our initiative. And we also have interviewed hundreds of students based on their feedback. And we've made composites of how diverse students will journey through the system. And one main finding is that Chinese and American students will initially watch student stories and generally learn about our initiative in different digital spaces. So for example, we found out that Chinese students tend to be more on WeChat and American students tend to be more on Facebook, but that's okay because we have live meetups and website and which show towards the center, and it will serve as a shared space which can knock down those divisions among different digital spaces, and it can drive intercultural exchange.
So this story circle methodology, as I hope we've really driven home, is based on UNESCO's cutting edge methodology that Dr. Deerdorf was instrumental in creating. And so I'm really excited to, I'm going to really briefly go over this, but if you have more detailed questions on the methodology, Dr. Deerdorf and I would love to answer them at the end. We'll certainly have time for Q&A and look forward to your questions and responses. There are, and I will admit, because we've been tailoring this for a bilingual group of students, as well as virtual meetups, exclusively virtual to begin with, given the current pandemic times we're living in, we have had to make difficult decisions on what things to modify and what things to sort of keep in their pure form based on what Dr. Deerdorf, they've written in their open access manual. And Dr. Deerdorf and I are in ongoing conversations about those things. So the method, the circles begin though when we welcome students. So in this case, we'll have co-facilitators. We'll always have co-facilitators, one of whom identifies as Chinese and one who identifies as American. And we'll welcome everyone, a large group. We anticipate having anywhere to start from 50 students to 120. We could certainly handle up to 150. Above that, it starts to get murky with how we would do in terms of the small groups. And once we've welcomed everyone, we review our core principles, intercultural principles, and then we engage in a brief centering meditation, which we introduce as a way to sort of get students to focus, like encourage students, invite students, to use Dr. Deardorff's term, which I really like that term, invite students to focus on their breath and really like in thinking about listening, not to respond or judge or offer your own opinion or really perform, but listening in order to receive. And to like allow a student's story and words to be situated within their broader story and words. And so we do that centering meditation, and then students are broken down into small groups, groups of 4 students based on like what we've realized is what's best for students. Then the students in groups of 4 share stories with one another. That starts with, and we'll go into the prompts in a second, but like there stops with a get acquainted prompt, and then we have a second prompt, which is an intercultural prompt, which sort of touches on sort of like the cultures coming into contact with one another, or times that like they really encourage students to think interculturally about multiple cultures and not just their own cultural background or their own personal history. And so then after that second round, we do a round of flashbacks where the students each share one thing that resonated with them. And we use this word, yinxi ta men de gongming in the Mandarin, like that resonated with them about each of the 3 stories that they heard. An ongoing decision we're still trying to figure out is whether the first round of story sharing, the get acquainted stories, have flashbacks as well. That's one thing that based on our initial piloting, we've already done almost 30, over the last couple of weeks, 30 sessions of pilot testing. Sometimes we've done those flashbacks, sometimes we haven't with the first round, and we're sort of seeing how it goes in the different ways, how much time it takes. And so the second step then is the get acquainted stories. The third step is intercultural story sharing with flashbacks, going around one by one. There are, of course, really important guidelines here, which we provide on a support sheet ahead of time for students to kind of keep in mind. But of course, some of them are to not feel like you need to perform, to share your story as you genuinely would like to that everyone is equal within this small group. Also not to interrupt when one another are sharing stories. Like it's structured in that sort of regard. So a couple other things to then mention. Critical reflection is just that. It's critically important to the initiative, to the overarching like story circle. It's not just some add-on at the end. Instead, students in their small group then reflect on a couple core questions, such as one of the questions would be, what are some similarities that you noticed across the stories? Another is what, or differences as well. But then also, what have you learned about your own cultural upbringing from participating today? And what have you learned about the process of engaging interculturally based on your experiences today? And we invite students within their small groups, their groups of 4 students, to like just informally, in an impromptu fashion, then share their thoughts, build off each other's ideas on those critical questions. And then we have one of the 4 students who is an Asia Society ambassador, jots down those ideas and shares them with the facilitators of the broader story circle, so that after 10 to 15 minutes of small group critical reflection, here I put 12 minutes, we go to a large group where then, I guess these are all like both the small and the large group are reflected in the 20-minute there, where then we have 8 to 10 minutes minimum of large group, all 50 to 120 students together. We can then touch on themes that are recurring across different groups or ideas, and individual groups can be invited to give voice to themes that came up within their smaller critical reflection. And so all of this is geared as a way to not only get to engage interculturally, but to then critically reflect on that engagement in a way that allows you to build real intercultural skills. And so that's generally speaking the methodology. There's a lot of questions here though that we're playing with. How do we match students, like in terms of like into those small groups? We have considerations including language in addition of, and preferred language as well as proficiency, in addition to thinking about how do we maintain diverse groups without essentializing students based on their nationality or other factors such as that. It is important that each of the small groups though have students that identify as Chinese and identify as American, recognizing that these are just broad terms and that there's a lot of communities of practice and identities therein. All right.
So as Frank Dolce already touched on earlier about types of prompts, I'm gonna go over this briefly. So we do have two different categories of prompts used during our story circle. And the first one is we call it get acquainted round. So this type of prompt serves as an icebreaker. And the second round is the intercultural round, which challenges students to go deeper and describe experience they've had with cultures coming into contact with one another. And you can view the examples on the screen. And we already have created an initial list of story circle prompts to use. But moving forward, we will collect potential prompts from our student ambassadors and participants, because they can also contribute their ideas to this process, and ensuring that they are the things our students, participants, they want to use and want to explore with one another.
So we've made many updates to the methodology to specifically how we'll implement based on our piloting. One thing that we've done, and I'm really excited about this, so I thought we'd share it, is rather than at the beginning, Frank and I, if we're the co-facilitators, kind of going through our core principles and go through all our guidelines and those sorts of things, those will be available. We have a support sheet which kind of overviews all of those things, and that will be shared with students when we're promoting each of our story circle sessions ahead of time. But one thing that students, this was a student-generated idea, and then actually the language was also, we worked with students to come up with it. And so what we did was we created this intercultural affirmation, which when we created it, our first thought was, that's great. We'll have all the students read it at the outset when we have the session. So we'll have 50 to 120 students that are all gonna just kind of read this together. And then immediately some of the feedback we got from students is, firstly, they're like, okay, this feels a little cultish. Like, we agree with the language, but it feels a little cultish. And then secondly, also, this is, I guess, language use and language learning are a secondary effect of participation. They're not the core central tenet of why you participate. So we, of course, have a lot of participants that are monolingual, that want to engage interculturally, but don't have the Mandarin or necessarily the super strong English, so that they choose to do it in one language or the other. With that in mind, it wouldn't really be in keeping with our principles to expect everyone to read this in both languages. So in keeping with our intercultural, multicultural, multilingual sort of background, though, what we thought to do is ask ahead of time a student ambassador to read this in the English and read it in the Mandarin. And that's been going really well. It's really powerful when you have all the students together and one student's reading it, but everyone's sort of there smiling, nodding, agreeing with it. And it's a powerful way for us to quickly, without ourselves having to talk so much like we are right now, right? Encapsulating this and creating this like sort of central tenet and like recognition. And that's one thing I do want to speak to really briefly, is that despite the fact we're bringing together students from across both sides of the Pacific, across the country, all sorts of institutions, 2-year, 4-year, urban setting, rural setting, there is something that unites all these students. And from a social psychological perspective, that's important. Everyone needs to feel like there's a reason, like we have a community here. We're building a coalition or a tribe of sorts around this idea that engaging across language cultural lines matters. Curiosity towards difference, these core principles. And reading this at the beginning allows us to emphasize that fact, that despite the fact we come from very different walks, there is something that brings us all together, that like unites us.
So the next, we are gonna present how we support our students by generating this support sheet. So we definitely know it's not easy to share stories across linguistic and cultural lines, especially with relative strangers. So for this reason, we work really hard to ensure that all our participants know the details of the meetups, and then they all have confidence that the other participants share with their same curious hearts. And one way we do all of this is through a support sheet. And the front looks like these. Wait, Frank, could you go back to the last slide? Yeah, the front looks like this, and it's intended to highlight when we are meeting and what we'll be sharing story sound. And so you can see the time, and then you can see the prompts. And then Frank, could you turn to the backside? So the backside of the support sheet offers more detailed information regarding how the process plays out. And also you can see our core principles printed on this support sheet, and which bring us together as a community. And in the late part, you can see the small boxes. These boxes are small boxes because we want to encourage students and participants to take down just small notes, only small notes that are a few words long, because we want to focus on that. Our goal is to show off like how good is your memory or how good is your note taking, but we want to focus on listening for understanding.
So diversity is not just a supplemental consideration for this initiative, but it's central to its success and to our core principles. We need this to be a safe space where diverse American and international students come together, recognizing and learning in more depth how there are many ways to move through the world as American, or as Chinese in this case, or as Asian as we expand and broaden this. So this ties also in with the moment our country is going through. In these pandemic times, of course, there's been a lot of scapegoating of Asian and Asian American communities in the US. With the Black Lives Matter movement happening right now, the racial injustices are at the forefront of discussion and are like being sort of discussed and challenged like the status quo in really important ways. And so with that in mind, it's really important that this be seen and really at its core be part of that. We want this initiative to be a space where diverse Asian students can hear that there are diverse ways to move through the world as American. And at the same time that like American students can recognize there are diverse ways to move through the world, not only as Asian, but specifically as Chinese, let's say, whether it's perspectives, whether it's ways of cultural traditions. And so that's central to this. Right here, these are 4 of the main ways: through the prompts, the way we promote it, through the actual procedures that we've articulated, as well as the principles that we like are actively seeking to make this a diverse and welcoming diverse space.
So I'm going to expand the role of our student ambassadors. So we are currently building a network of diverse domestic and international students with whom our core principles, core missions resonates with. And we are hoping to grow this network up to 100 international students and 100 domestic students over the course of these 4. And we will have special events and networking opportunities for our core student ambassadors. And in exchange, these student ambassadors will participate regularly in our bi-weekly story circle meetups. And each group of 4 students will include 1 student ambassador. And the ambassador will be responsible for the first thing is leading the small group introductions and organizing the order of story sharing and flashbacks, and jotting down the key takeaways from the critical reflection, and ensuring that the current principles are being followed and in our story circle. And ambassadors will be sure to remind participants that they are simply there to grease the wheels and make sure things go smoothly. And so mentioning the student ambassador's responsibilities. So if you want to be a student ambassador, students must first meet with someone from our team to be introduced and informed about our initiative. And second requirement is you need to partake in 3 demo stories, 3 demo story circles. And the third requirement is partaking in 2 training sessions, and 1 focus on the story circle methodology, and another one is on intercultural competence more broadly in this process.
As we near the end of this presentation too, going back really quick, I want to highlight the fact that actually having a small group moderator within the small groups is not a part of the original methodology that you'll read with the story circle manual, and is something that we're still actively considering moving forward. We like certainly based on our own piloting, it has proved to be very helpful to have a student that can ensure that everyone knows who's going next, and can keep things sort of moving in a way. We obviously in our piloting haven't had to worry about policing or anything of that nature. Like ensuring students are adhering to core principles, but that could sort of come up, we're not sure. But this is certainly something, here's a great example of us thinking of modifying the actual methodology in a way that will keep conversations up with Dr. Deerdorf and ensure that we are sort of achieving the ends that we want. With the thinking being that you are introducing a power dynamic here. If you have a student that identifies, oh, I'm an ambassador, I've done this before, I'm of some sort of relative sort of status here, that could affect how students share. And so there certainly is sort of a balance of, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? And we need to make sure we're testing it both ways and exploring this from all angles moving forward. In terms of our timeline, we've been doing a lot of research. I might have mentioned I started on the job in January. I spent the spring the winter and early months, even like when we weren't even thinking about a pandemic yet, it's hard to imagine. I was doing a lot of research, interviewing students, sort of getting a sense for how intercultural engagement more broadly. That allowed us over the summer to settle on, in the early summer, late spring really, settle on story circles. This is the way forward here. For a whole host of reasons, it realized that this was the way. Discussing articles or other Asia Society content wasn't having the same positive effect. So we decided to test story circles, and we've been modifying them all summer. Moving into the fall now, step 3, we're building up our network, as well as building up the skills of our ambassadors who will be central to the success of this initiative. And we'll continue to do that. And once we have a robust enough network of ambassadors, diverse network of Chinese and American, as well as more broadly students that are interested or from Asia, interested in being ambassadors and having been sufficiently sort of trained, then we'll be launching the story circles. I've tentatively put January 2021 for that. If our network gets up to what I deem to be enough ambassadors, which is at least 100 students that identify as Asian and 100 ambassadors that identify as American in some sort of way. Obviously, there's some students that might identify as both or as neither. We have a couple students in Germany, for example, that are interested in this, but we want to ensure that we have this sort of diverse ambassador baseline before we decide to promote and actually start doing the circles regularly. So that's the timeline.
So we hope you found this introduction helpful, and we welcome any questions and feedback in our Q&A session later. And we encourage you to reach out to Director Dolce with any ideas. And our presentation today is not ending yet, so don't leave. Next, we will hear from our 4 students who have been participating in story circles this summer and who are considering potentially participating in our initiative as ambassadors this fall. So I think I see everyone online. So could you turn on your camera? And yeah, so hello, hi, our potential student ambassadors. So it's so great to see you today, and thank you very much for joining us and share your experience with the participants. And just want to start with how is everyone doing today?
I'm good.
That's good. So I would just start introducing myself, and then
Frank, before you start, I want to make sure, is Raven also, because I can't see Raven, I want to make sure Raven's also in here, or Raven also.
I'm on.
Okay.
I'm on. I need permission to turn on the camera.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to do that, but hopefully, Min, if you could turn on Raven's camera, that would be great. Well, before Frank, you jump in, I also want to say that all those words that were coming up at the outset when you all did Dr. Deerdorf's activity, our ambassadors at large, they embody those terms. And I'm so grateful that we've gotten to touch base with students from so many different walks who this initiative resonates with. We've learned a lot from all of you, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to learn from you today. So Frank, with that having been said, I'll let you continue. Yeah, so first I will start introducing myself, and then we can all go around by saying our names and what we study on. So, and then we will ask you the questions. So to be frank, again, my name is Frank, and you can call me EJ, my Chinese name, either one works. And I'm a rising junior studying international relations and econ double major. So could we start by going around and just saying our names and what we study? Maybe Carissa, might we start with you?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Carissa. I am a rising senior, and I am a psychology neuroscience major and a chemistry minor. I am super happy to be here today. Do we want to go through introductions first? I'll happy to pass it along to Nathaniel.
Hello, I'm Nathaniel. I'm currently an international economic policy major with agriculture and computer science minors. So I guess next Raven can go.
Hi everyone, really happy to be here with you all. I'm a physics major and minoring in international social justice and political science. And then, so.
Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm studying economics and computer science, and I'm a rising junior too.
Welcome, welcome. So I forgot to mention, like, we will go around based on alphabetical order, but then for the first question, we'll just reverse the order. So we will start with Zell, and then Raven, Nathaniel, and Carissa for the first question. So our first question to all of you is, what drew you to this initiative? And in other words, what initially interested you in our initiative?
Okay, so yeah, I was attracted to the idea of 好奇心, the curiosity, and the idea of creating a brave space for everyone. Since an all-time driving force of me is my curiosity in exploring our world, which includes different cultures. And I was hit by the culture difference when I first came to the US for high school. However, at the time, I didn't get a chance to really discuss it with my peers, since I thought it would be awkward to bring it to the tables. So I just let it slide and try to fit in. However, I believe in a bigger picture that we as humans that should and will come together one day. And no matter our nationalities, races, genders, all that, but the first step is always to acknowledge and understand the cultural differences. And this summer, I found this project, and I was glad to find that there are a group of people who are willing to discuss and learn about and embrace the cultural difference. And also, I found this a great opportunity to meet more people and make more friends with diverse background. Yep.
Thank you for sharing. And I forgot the order that we could actually do this like we do with story circles, where after everyone shares a story, we always say thank you for sharing, and then we like nominate the next person who's going to share a story. So Frank, you want to take the lead with that?
Sure. So we will say thank you for sharing, and then I think next is Raven, and after that Nathaniel, and then Carissa. So Raven, you start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Val. Yeah, I definitely echo everything that he said. This summer, I had a really, really impactful experience with a pen pal in Hebei. And prior to this, I had never spoken with anyone outside of the US. And so it was just really eye-opening to hear not only about, you know, the pandemic from his perspective, but also just his day-to-day life and the things that he was experiencing, the small cultural differences that made us laugh. Like, for example, one time I sent a note that said like, oh, it's 11/11, make a wish. And he was like, oh, 11/11 is Singles Day here. That's not a very lucky number. So just like little things like that, where you wouldn't even expect to find a cultural difference, but that really humanize you to each other and show like the commonalities and humor and things like that. And so I really wanted to continue having those experiences, the ones that you don't necessarily get in a classroom. And in finding this Asia Society Bridge program, I realized how powerful it would be, not only to have so many people coming together, but the fact that there would be small breakout circles. So it wasn't, I think Dr. Dolce uses this term a lot, it's not performative. And I really appreciate that space where we can kind of leave our expectations at the door and not feel like You know, in language learning, maybe you feel like, oh, I made a mistake in what I was saying and maybe I offended someone. So I really appreciated just this creation of a space where we can be authentic with each other and learn about each other and really lean into our curiosity and the things that we don't understand, because I think that's where the majority of the work needs to be done in terms of cross-cultural communication and understanding. So I was just really inspired by this idea of a student-led kind of safe space where the emphasis wasn't necessarily on language learning and more on understanding, but still incorporating that aspect of whatever language you speak, however you want to engage, you are more than welcome to do that.
Thank you for sharing, Reagan. Nathaniel?
Yeah, so when I first heard about this program, I thought it would be pretty cool to learn more about like the nuances of cultural expression and understanding with my Chinese peers, and that would sort of give me a help me in that regard. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I've done a lot of farming across the world, and in Africa and India and all across the States and in South America. And the benefits of having that ability to go to these, to work with peers and coworkers who are from different cultures, there's a real concrete benefit. Interacting with and learning about these other cultures and gaining that cultural competency, yes, it gave me friends and contacts around the world, and it gave me opportunities too. But more than that, it truly and fundamentally changed like who I am and who I perceive myself to be. And I believe I'm a more open and perceptive person because of that. And so I'm excited and curious to see what will come out of this program, and that's why I'm here today.
Thanks for sharing, Nathaniel.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, Nathaniel.
Carissa?
Yeah, I heard about this program from a professor at my college, and I was really curious about what the program had to offer. I think the most interesting part of it was the emphasis on intercultural competency and engagement, and I think that particularly now, it's more important than ever to be connecting with others. And so the opportunity provided through Asia Society Bridge not only facilitates this kind of cultural exchange, but it provides one that expands past geographical bounds. As you can see, we're doing this program digitally, and especially now with everyone social distancing or being all across America or the world, you know, it's really gives us a wonderful opportunity to engage not only language skills and storytelling, but to help better understand cultural values and nuances. And so I really love the idea of being able to come into this to be an ambassador and to also be a learner, to be able to build a community of people who are aiming to understand others and who value this sort of intercultural exchange.
Thank you for
Thanks a lot
sharing.
for sharing, Carissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you all. And so moving into the second sort of like question that we want to ask you, what did you get out of your initial story circle experience? And what do you think you'd get out of it moving forward? I also like want to challenge you and really encourage like this. We're genuinely curious. Like what did you really like about the experience, and what are you looking forward to moving forward? And if you would like to give voice to also something you think that we could work on or something to make it even better. I know that when we're getting feedback, after every story circle, we all provide a space for you to provide feedback either privately or in your small groups. And we look at that on a regular basis and think about how do we change the methodology? How do we like take this student feedback and use it moving forward? So please right now provide a space. This is an opportunity for you. What do you think about the initial experience you've had? How do you see it helping you moving forward, or like how do you see your involvement help, like, and then also like how can we make it better? Lots that you can touch on there, and we'll go the opposite order this time. So Carissa, we'll start with you and go that way.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has been really valuable about this program is how receptive they are to feedback. And so one of those things is like being able to see and being willing to identify weaknesses and then going forward and using that to create a better program, not only for all the participants, but for the people who will be benefiting from the experience. And all of this will be shared on the web. And so it really creates this dialogue that is easily accessible and really works to engage multiple people across different platforms. Being in the story circles initially, my experiences were really incredible. I was actually quite surprised about how deeply I was able to resonate with others' experiences. But also there were times when people would share stories and I was entirely unfamiliar with their experiences. And so it really allowed me to practice, you know, those values of empathy and sympathy, learning. And I always like to say I'm constantly unlearning as well. I think that it's so important to hear things that you're unfamiliar with or that aren't something that you know a lot about, and being able to deconstruct those stereotypes or prejudices that society is deeply ingrained around us. And so one of the best parts is definitely the critical reflection, because a lot of the prompts we initially will listen to each other. And so that's a lot about active listening and devotion to hearing each other. Whereas the critical reflection is a space for us to come together and to really start a conversation. And, you know, that's either to relate to one another, to validate one another, or to ask questions. And so I think it really does a great job about facilitating the discussion and encouraging one another to, like, each other to connect.
Thanks for sharing, Carissa.
Thanks for sharing.
Nathaniel?
Thank you, Carissa.
Thanks, Carissa. I love stories. So, like, my mother is a librarian, and so my entire childhood had like folk and fairy tales all over the house. And to sit back and listen to how someone else experiences life, it's unparalleled. I think that's really important to connecting within this organization. During this past story circle, I actually grew closer to you, Frank, where I was in India for a long time, and while I was there, I changed a lot, I learned a lot, and I'm a better man because of it. It was really it's hard to describe listening to how Frank's interactions and experience with an Indian friend gave him the same insight that I got out of my time in India. And yeah, I learned more about Frank and who he is as a person, but I also learned about how I changed and why I changed the way that I did, and that strengthened my own resolve in who I am now. And so it was a really weird moment where it was really powerful to me. So that was one moment that I got something really, really great out of this. If I do this regularly, I think it'll definitely help my personal and professional life. I currently work for an organization, Grow Appalachia. We do agricultural development in Appalachia, and my work with farmers in Africa and India, but especially this opportunity to develop my cultural competence, it's directly relating with my work going into these rural Appalachian regions and talking with these farmers and our farmer families, and being able to relate with them and create these relationships where we're eventually able to develop our own food plans and stuff. And so that is one way I do see this directly benefiting me, but also just the way that we're able to get this out for other people as well. So again, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
Raven?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really good example of the kinds of connections you make in story circles. So Nathaniel, I've worked in a library for 3 years now. And so like little things like that, little bits and pieces of your life, you kind of discover along the way in these story circles and see how they overlap with the experiences of others. And so like the idea of stories being really pivotal and like having spaces where people can share those stories, kind of edifying a community and really forming the foundation of relationships. That's what I took away from the story circles. And the one that I did most recently, I was kind of just shocked by the way we were able to build a community in such a small period of time. Whether it was comforting each other or encouraging each other in various language abilities, it very quickly became like a very small family unit. And even though we only spent maybe an hour and a half together, just understanding like the perspectives that people were sharing, really appreciating the vulnerability that was cultivated in that space and the safety that everyone felt was so valuable to me. And I think that if I were to be an ambassador, those kinds of experiences, I think they would become a more natural part of the way I engage with people. I think constantly flexing these like intercultural muscles and developing the ability to listen empathetically and to share vulnerably, I think that has the potential to transform the way that we relate to each other in our day-to-day lives, especially considering how distanced COVID has made us and how a lot of times, you know, even Zoom calls can feel very impersonal. And so I think the ability to facilitate those discussions, and also as Carissa was saying, to be a constant learner in these spaces and not, you know, privilege my views or my beliefs over anyone else's, but really being kind of like a lifelong student learner and student leader. I think that would be one of the best parts of being an ambassador.
Thanks for sharing, Raven. Sal?
Thanks, Raven.
Okay. Yeah, so I want to say first thing, my experience was awesome. It was awesome. And it was not awkward at all. And everything went really smoothly. And the feedback I got, like, I contribute to that, the story circle would be, it was too short. It was 90 minutes long, but I still feel it was too short. Because it makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel connected with everybody within the circle. So it makes me want to share more and talk more with them. And during the story circle, we talked about and in the circle, in the circles that I attended, it was mostly Asians, but with diverse background. So we got Japanese who live in the US, we got Vietnamese who live in China, and me who spent over 6 years in the US and now live in China too. So it brings to me that I was paying a lot of attention to the cultural differences between Asians and Americans. And I've tried to explain Asian cultures to a lot of my Western friends. I just realized, not until the last story circle, that I have how much I have overlooked the diversity within Asian cultures. So I believe that being an ambassador, by constantly sharing and hearing stories from a diverse group of people, will really help me understand my culture better and the diversity of cultures better, and help me see the world under a different light. And to kind of mention what we discussed before, that in the chat, a lot of people saying the good quality of a good man is patience, is hearing. You can find all that in the story circle, because we're all there to share, to listen, and to connect. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Zal. Thank you all for participating today and sharing your own perspectives with us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all for a story circle soon, hopefully, as we continue to test moving forward. All right, so thank you. You guys can turn off your cameras now, so you don't have to feel like you're under the microscope. And we would now like to, I believe I can stop sharing, and I'm still here. We can now like to open the floor to questions. Min, I'd love if you could just nominate questions that have come in the Q&A, if any. I've also prepared some commonly asked questions that have come from ambassadors so that if we don't have a whole lot of questions, I'll certainly we'll go to those and sort of share with all of you some of the things that are often asked to us by students during our outreach.
So Frank, we do have a question. I think one was sent to Dr. Deerdorf. Dr. Deerdorf, if you are available to address some of the questions, that'd be great.
Sure, I'm happy to.
So one of the questions, I believe, was about how the methodology addresses prejudice, right?
Yeah, so I'll start, but I also turn it over to Frank and colleagues as well. As I mentioned, it's such an adaptable methodology, and so much of it is in the prompts that are used. And so there can be specific prompts that would actually address that head on, if that's desired. And as you heard from the students' experiences as well, that they were able to help dispel some of the stereotypes and so on that may have occurred. Frank, anything further you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of how it tackled, I want to tackle this question thoughtfully, because I remember when I started, I'll speak totally candidly, when I started this initiative, I remember thinking, I hope that students don't say anything bad, in a really simple way, like, oh man, I hope that no one says anything that has an impact. Recognizing and like that there can be a disconnect between the intent of a message and the impact, right? I hope that nothing ever has a negative impact on anyone else. And what I realized through engaging in these, and Frank, I'd love for you to speak to this as well, is that when sort of, what I've noticed is that there's been an opportunity for students to learn about different things. There are a million examples I want to give, but again, for confidentiality reasons, I don't feel comfortable like sharing the details, but like maybe where broadly speaking, the way you're categorizing different, like sort of, it could be anything from holidays to like sort of organizing, shows that you're like a certain perspective or priority based on like your background, even the terms you use for things. And then for students to sort of be like be invited to see that other students see it differently. Because of the core principles and the structure, it ends up being something where students get an opportunity to learn about other students' perspectives. And even sometimes I think maybe learn a little bit that someone else didn't see it the way you saw it, but it never becomes confrontational by any means, because like the students have come together for this sort of, with this sort of orientation towards openness to difference and to learning. And so the intent has always been seen as pure, like as genuine, like positive intent. And it becomes a space where you can learn, and to use Carissa's term, unlearn, like things that maybe, you wouldn't know. So in terms of prejudice, I feel like it's a really effective space for that, because you have an opportunity to sort of like share with one another. Things have come up in the critical reflection though, where it's like, oh yeah, and like we have these different ways of looking at this, and I saw it this way, and so these things can be talked out, and you can sort of see that in hindsight, it's like, oh man, yeah, I thought about it this way before, and now I recognize that there are these other ways. I hope that was effective. Frank, do you have anything to add?
Yes, so adding on both of you said, I totally agree with you. And then also I remember from my high school student government campaign speech, I mentioned differences that would bring us together. So in the story circle and in Asia Society Bridge Initiative, in general, we can learn from the differences, because we have students from diverse backgrounds, and we can definitely improve the awareness of different people's ideas and then also different social issues. And that's what I want to say.
I guess I would
just add one more.
Oh, Darla, you go.
Sorry, I was going to add one more thing. When we were doing, with the United Nations, with UNESCO, I do a train the trainers on this methodology. And when we had several professors join us in the train the trainers in Austria, and it was fascinating to see some of their responses after they had gone through story circles. And one of them even said, I had no idea that I held those kinds of stereotypes about others. So even for a faculty member, for a professor, it was really eye-opening to go through this kind of experience.
So Frank, we do have 2 more questions submitted.
Certainly.
You can decide which one to address first. One is about how can faculty support this initiative? Is there a way for them to participate, observe if they so wish? And do you need more student ambassadors? I guess the answer is yes, right? The second question is, many of the students, they're kind of burned out on engaging virtually. How would you recommend combating that? So again, there are 2 questions and I'll leave it to you guys.
Certainly, thank you. I'll start with Yu's question, Li Lao Shi. So yes, certainly. So encourage your students to participate is the short answer. Right now, we're actively interested in having more ambassadors sign up and then help us. Like we test. We do these regularly. Frank and I, on an almost nearly daily basis, are doing story circles with diverse groups of students, and then collecting their feedback. The actual doing of these like story circles, the practicing serves as part of the training for the ambassadors. There are also other we're going to put together a commonly asked questions sort of review that we do with ambassadors and other sorts of training that are not too like time consuming, and that will accommodate at various times for our ambassador network. But there will be other elements to the training, but a focal point of the training is actually getting the students to sign up and to participate in these ways. I would also add that the first thing we always do is we ask students to reach out to us, and we schedule a time to meet with them one-on-one and overview the initiative, share it with them in a little more detail, answer any questions that they have. And that's really important, firstly, because we want to make sure that all students that participate are generally on board with this core mission of ours. And secondly, because we want to have a little, like, we only want students that really have 好奇心, that 真正的有好奇心, that really want to do this. We're not desperate to get to a certain number, and we're definitely like, we want to ensure that students believe in this. And with that in mind, we like the idea of taking the time to meet with them. If they don't have time next week to meet with Frank or I and like go over it for 15, 20 minutes, we're a little skeptical whether they're interested in genuinely in participating moving forward. So we'll certainly accommodate our schedules to them, but have students reach out to Frank or myself. My contact info is on the deck, which I can share. And yeah, and was that the full question? The question disappeared. Oh, it's answered here. Was that the full?
Yeah, the next question is about how do you work with students who are burned out on engaging virtually? That's actually a really good question. We had some summer interns this summer, and they are in Zoom or Google Hangout. By the end of the day, they just want to close their eyes. So
yeah, and that's certainly as someone that's been doing 2-3 story circles a day a lot of days, and each one takes an hour and a half. I mean, I can relate to being on Zoom a lot lately. I can certainly sort of thank you for this question. One thing I'd say is that I do think the structure, it is work. I mean, I think Dr. Deerdorf would be the first to admit, like, listening for understanding, especially when our culture so many times like teaches us to listen in different ways, is work. And so what I'd say for this is why we're not doing daily story circles here. Like, our core thing is we're going to do these in a recurring fashion. Our plan initially is 2 Thursday evenings a month. It's 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific. That means over in China, they're at 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, which we're learning tends to be okay for a lot of students there in terms of their schooling. So our thinking is we do these in these bi-weekly fashions so that it's not a huge time commitment for students. Students that are genuinely interested can generally find time. If Thursday evenings end up not being an ideal time, we might have one on a Tuesday and a Thursday. We really want to be accommodating in terms of making sure that diverse students can participate. But we don't want participation to be overly taxing on students. Especially given we want diverse, not just like nationalities, not just regions, but also socioeconomic status, race, and thinking about socioeconomic status in particular as like having diversity. A lot of students have jobs, and if you're a full-time student with a job, like a full-time job or like a major job, like, you don't have the time to commit 10 hours a week to doing something. So this is like 2 to 3 hours a month of participation as an ambassador. And even students that can't meet that threshold, like, you can join our community, and once you've touched base with us, you can participate in one of the outer rims, where perhaps you just want to read some stories from ambassadors that share them with us, as well as our core team when we share our stories. And then every now and then, when you can find the time or you don't feel burnout, join us for a story circle or two. It doesn't have to be something that's like, overly taxing or overly formal, I'd say. That's one thing that really attracted me to story circles was, as Darla mentioned, like even the ambassadors, it's not like an intensive training. Like the students this is designed in a way where everyday students can participate so long as they adhere to our core principles. Yeah.
I would just add that this is really quite a different way of typically connecting online. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, most persons found, at least when we've done this virtually, that it's just such an amazing way to connect so deeply with others virtually in ways that don't typically happen in online classes, so to speak, and so on. So it really can be quite energizing to be able to connect so meaningfully with others online.
Well, I have a request. First of all, and we have maybe 4 minutes left. Maybe Dr. Deerdorf and Frank will do some wrap up. I have a question because we, through our Heartland connections, have been trying to do two things. One, from the Heartland region, promote understanding, right? At the younger generation, older. One question is for your student or through your work, have they been able to apply the new gained or enhanced intercultural understanding to their parents' generation? Or are we looking that ripple effect to come much later? So that's one question. Last one is for Dr. Deerdorf. Can this be used for high schoolers? Because we were, there were high school in Ohio and with pen pal in China, and they're already connected in some way. We're just curious to hear that. Again, I'm aware of the time. I will leave you guys to answer question and wrap it up. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Let me start with the last question first. Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the official pilots was with middle schoolers. So it really does work for high schoolers and middle schoolers. There are certain adaptations that might be good to make. And in the manual, it talks about how to use this with children if you're going to adapt for younger ages. So I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants to use it for the high school or younger. There's also a question about plans to expand this into communities outside of the school or academic setting. And I would say that at least at United Nations, UNESCO definitely really working to get this out into the local communities. Here in North Carolina, we're trying to do the same with healthcare workers. I mean, it's so crucial for those who are working on the front lines of the pandemic to be able to connect very well with those who are different from them. It's for life or death matters in some cases. So yes, I feel so strongly that this needs to go out far beyond universities, far beyond formal learning settings and so on. And there are plans to do that, and certainly defer to my Asia Society colleagues to respond a bit further on that. And another question I saw was William Harrison was asking about how to participate in story circles meetings. And there are definitely ways we can connect you in. Again, I also defer to my Asia Society colleagues on the remaining parts of these questions.
Certainly. I'm trying to think like the best way for us. I guess we'll find a way to like send out to William and anyone else that's interested in participating. We'll certainly be in touch. We'll send out an email to participants, letting you know how to get signed up. I do want to touch on the question that was posed, the first one. So like when we think about engaging across difference, like this is not just US-China difference we're talking about here. And like generational difference is a huge difference. And so this general notion of listening for understanding and these other core like skills that we're teaching are things that can affect you in all sorts of relationships in your life. And so I think that yes, like engaging across like with like it will if students participate regularly, the goal is to help, it'll change how they engage socially with all sorts of other people in their lives, and hopefully rub off on other people in their lives in terms of like listening, not just to refute but to generally like receive other people's ideas. And then I wanted to also touch on one thing. I don't know about in terms of the generation above, but as the father of a 2-year-old who is being raised, like he's biracial and he's being raised like bilingually, like I've learned so much from diverse students, like college students who have experiences growing up in similar or in like also in biracial, like diverse environments similar to that. And like, I've learned so much that's informed how I want to go and treat him as a father and talk to him about being biracial someday. And so I know it's informed me a lot in my own practice that way, in my personal life.
Great. So it sounds like we all have a lot of work to connect with the participants. And Frank, you're right. We have their email. We can reach out to them. And one thing that is really encouraging, Dr. Deerdorf, I'll reach out to you about working with high schoolers. And Frank, yes, we do definitely need to work more on the Heartland community. I just want to close with one example. We had a donation PPE that was given by a Chinese American nonprofit. We gave it to a Heartland fire station. The first thing they said after they saw the box with Chinese letter on it is this contaminated? We were like, oh, wow, okay. Well, this is a donation. So again, I think as Blaine mentioned earlier, we're living a very interesting time. So those students, the ambassador, have tremendous influence as the light that can, really help dispel some of those misconceptions, right? But thank you again, and really honored to have this partnership to bring this event to the public, and look forward to connecting more. And thank you all for joining us, staying on through this 90 minutes. And you have a great rest of the day, and I guess we'll see bye now, right? Bye. Thank you.
Great.